Again, everyone, you are at the webinar for World War II and the Cold War, New Ways to Engage with Familiar Topics. I'm Denise Olson. I'm Director of Education Marketing at GBH Education. And next slide, please. For those of you not familiar with GBH, we're formerly WGBH. We are the Boston-based flagship station in the PBS network, and we're the producers of many of the most popular programs on PBS, including American Experience, Frontline, and Nova, as well as many programs and games for kids. Next slide, please. GBH is also a partner with PBS in the creation and management of the PBS LearningMedia platform. PBS LearningMedia is a free PBS resource with tens of thousands of digital learning resources for grades pre-K through 12. The material spans disciplines and features support materials and standards alignment. Some of the content comes from PBS shows and stations across the country, and some is created just for learning media. Everything is free. It's not a freemium model, it's free. There will be some helpful links for exploring the platform in the resource document that you will receive after the webinar, and we encourage you to go visit the site and explore. And in fact, right now, up on the landing page, there's a tour of learning media by a teacher that you might find interesting. Next slide, please. Tonight, however, we're focusing on World War II and the Cold War for grades 6 through 12. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters, my colleagues, all of whom are former or current teachers. I think that's important. Sue Wilkins is the Director of Social Studies Curriculum and Instruction for GBH and PBS LearningMedia. For over 20 years, Sue taught U.S. and modern world history to high school students. In addition, Sue was a mentor teacher for many years and the history methods instructor for an in-house teacher certification program. After leaving the classroom, Sue became the Director of Education at the International Museum of World War II, and while there, developed some of the resources you'll see tonight with the team from GBH. Alicia Butler, who you met earlier, is a 25-year veteran social studies teacher. In addition to working at GBH Education, she teaches U.S. History and African American Studies for District of Columbia Public Schools. Alicia was recognized as the 2019 History Teacher of the Year by the Daughters of the American Revolution for the District of Columbia, and the 2019 Gilder Lehrman National History Teacher of the Year for her innovative lessons and civic-based student projects. She currently serves as a member of the Development Committee for the AP African American Studies course and was a contributing author of the recently published updated third edition of Freedom on My Mind, A History of African Americans. Mel Bissell, Social Studies Curriculum Specialist at GBH in Boston, is a career educator who has worked in high schools and middle schools as a teacher and curriculum coordinator. Mel was a teacher educator for Boston College and in school-based settings. Her experience includes teaching a variety of social studies courses in suburban and city schools, and she is passionate about high-quality, engaging curriculum being available to all teachers and students. And now I'm going to turn it back to Alicia and our starting slide.
Thank you so much, Denise. Well, let's take a look and see how you did on that warm up. I must say I was reading some of the people that you put in the chat, and everyone did an amazing job. The first person was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. We have Dory Miller. Number two, number three are the famous women shipbuilders at the U.S. Navy Yard, California. And then you have Stanislaus Petrov for number four. Elizabeth Eckford from the Little Rock Nine, number five. Then you have Fritz Kuhn, number six. Louis Armstrong, number seven. And then you have Bob Dylan as number eight. Now, I know that many of you all out there are probably wondering what can Louis Armstrong and Bob Dylan possibly have to do with lessons on the Cold War? And that is precisely why we're here to find new ways, or to share with you new ways to teach familiar topics relating to World War II and the Cold War. Next slide. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sue.
Great. Hi, everyone. So nice to have you here this evening. So this evening, our essential question is, how can interactive digital media resources empower you and your students to critically re-examine and expand their perspectives on familiar historical events? In this case, World War II and the Cold War. And the goals for tonight are to share with you resources that we feel will engage your students and that feature the contributions of everyday people during World War II and the Cold War, to elevate lesser known stories, events, and people to broaden student understanding, and to see different types of interactive resources that we create on PBS Learning Media that you can use when you're teaching these topics. And I do just want to say that obviously we're just sharing a small number of the resources we have available. In our resource document that we will share with you after the webinar, we will list many, many more World War II and Cold War media-based resources that we have available to use that focus not only on core or sort of traditional topics, but also on these sort of lesser known narratives and stories. All right, so I'm going to turn it back to Alicia.
All right. So before I show you our first resource, I have one more puzzle for you. We can go to the next slide. So it's the summer of 1939. I'd love for you to take a look at these pictures and for you to guess, where do you think these pictures were taken? Summer of 1939. Do you think it was A, Vienna, Austria, B, Paris, France, C, Belgrade, Yugoslavia, or is it D, New York, USA? Okay, got some answers there. All right, couple D's, couple A's. Looks like A's and D's are kind of fighting for dominance in the chat right now. Okay, a lot of people thinking it's A, Vienna. Some people are saying, oh, looks like it might be New York. Got one for Belgrade. Kelly, I'm with you. Kelly says, I really just don't want it to be D with the sad face. Well, Kelly, I really hope I'm sorry I disappointed you. Go to the next slide. It is, in fact, New York, the United States. Now, listen, I love doing this act. Oh, no, yes, Benjamin. I love doing this activity with my students because, first of all, they come up with all types of elaborate strategies for trying to guess like where it's taking place. I mean, they really try to become detectives because they're looking at everything, the plants, the trees, the like, the sun, with the shade, like, where could it possibly be? But more importantly, what ends up happening when I do this activity with my students, they all ask how and why would Nazi youth training camps be held in the United States? Well, this is also an activity that you could do with our students to get them engaged as a warm up before we talk about our next topic. Go to the next slide. We would love for you to take the next 45 seconds to show a clip from one of our resources from American Experience, Nazism in 1930s America, and I'll give you a little bit of historical context about what we just saw.
In ever-increasing numbers, the nation's youth has been going away to camp. This year has seen more boys and girls at camp than ever before. All of them have enjoyed common experiences, common adventures, building muscle, learning fellowship, acquiring camp spirit.
It looked like any summer camp in America. It looked normal, but it wasn't normal. It was Nazi camp.
All right, next slide. So, a little bit of, like I said, a little additional historical context. The German American Bund, or the German American Federation, was a German American Nazi organization which was established in 1936. The German American Bund had anywhere from 30,000 to 50,000 members, and it's basically a great example of Nazis operating in America. Now, the map that you now see is a very effective and strategic visual representation of its prevalence in the US in the 1936. And what I like to do with my students after showing them that clip and before having them guess, where they think this is taking place, I'll put this map on the board and then I'll ask them, to analyze it. What trends do you see? What inferences can you make? What questions does this map, spark? And more importantly, how does this, what you just, saw in the map that you're analyzing, how does this challenge what you know or you think you knew about the influence of Nazism in the 1930s? Next slide. Now, many of my students are often left asking, well, how could this happen in the United States? Now, I find it ironic because although most of my students have learned about almost all of the people in the historical situations that are on the slide in piecemeal, they often don't realize how they collectively worked together to provide a fertile ground for Nazism in the United States. We know by looking at some of the images, I mean, we have Henry Ford, we have Father Coughlin. These are people that were known anti-Semites. They are examples of pre-existing anti-Semitism in the United States, even before World War II. And we also can't forget that, we had a thriving Jim Crow system of racial segregation as well, and strong World War II anti-intervention sentiments. Next slide. And so the German American Bund, like I said, this pro-Nazi organization and one of the largest fascist groups in the United States during the 1930s, believe it or not, they were allowed to march and hold massive rallies and defy state laws prohibiting hate speech. While most Americans opposed the racist, anti-Semitic, and pro-Nazi agenda of the German American Bund, groups like the American Civil Liberties Union defended Bund members' right to free speech, press, and assembly as it was established in the First Amendment. In 1938, they held a massive rally at Madison Square Garden, and over 20,000 Bundists were admitted inside the garden that night. Now, there were tens of thousands anti-Bundists that were outside protesting and trying to get in. So what I'd like to do right now is show you, a couple of minutes of a clip from the video, and we'll come back and discuss.
For all around the country, but the Bund was going to Madison Square Garden in the center of the Jewish American world.
Over 20,000 Bundists were admitted inside the garden that night. Outside were tens of thousands of anti-Bundists wanting to get inside.
Attention! I pledge undivided allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Because of the visibility of this event, there had been a sort of general assumption that the Bund speakers would refrain from their most hateful speech, especially against Jews. But that proves not to be the case.
The Jew is a
All right, thank you. So we don't just give you resources and clips to watch. We also give you discussion questions that can go along with it. And some of the discussion questions that I've used from this resource is, how did the German American Bund try to appeal to Americans? Identify the symbols, the strategies that were used and the emotions that they elicited. And how does this help you understand the German American Bund appeal? And then to what extent do you think high profile figures and organizations use the same methods and strategies today? Now, I really, really like this particular resource because it allows students to see the symbols and the strategies used and the emotions that they elicited. But I also like this resource because it captures real-time resistance to Nazism in the United States. Because for every student that I have that asks, well, how could this have happened in the United States? And, I also have students that ask, well, why didn't or how did people actually fight back? So I actually encourage you after this webinar, get on our website. I know that Denise is putting the link in the chat. Watch the entire clip because not only do you watch the rally and you see all the symbolism, but you also see resistance. There's a very brave young lady in the midst of all that in the rally in Madison Square Garden. She gets up and protest. And my students, like I said, they just go crazy over it because they are amazed at her bravery. Next slide. So like I said, like all of our resources in the collection, it does come with teaching tips, which you see on the screen right now. And they contain essential and supporting questions before reading activities. We even give you all a warm up during and after video questions and suggested activities that can be used after the video. For those of us that are in the classroom that are familiar with the 5E lesson plan, what I really like about our resources is that they all of them have the elements of a solid, effective 5E lesson plan. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Sue.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Alicia. So I'm going to use my time tonight to talk with you and share with you this collection of resources, Life During World War II, using artifacts to understand history. This is a collection of resources focused on different aspects of life and different groups of people during World War II from the major Allied and Axis powers. And these could be used in a world history course. You could focus in on the US experience if you were teaching US history. I think it's a pretty versatile collection. And you can see on the left-hand side that there are sort of three major categories: propaganda, women, and youth. And all three, I think, fit tonight's theme of new ways to engage with familiar topics, because we don't usually talk about women. We don't usually talk about young people or talk about the widespread use of propaganda during the war. And as important as it is for students to know about the iconic leaders and generals and battles and more, these resources are designed to broaden their historical knowledge to include the many ways that ordinary people did really extraordinary things during the war. So I want to first take you to this resource, which is part of the collection on young people. This is an interactive, and it focuses on young people in both the Allied and Axis nations and how they were impacted by World War II. And by that, we mean both how did the war affect them, because of course they were greatly impacted by the war, but also how did they affect the war? They were not just passive bystanders during World War II. And in addition, because the interactive is driven by original artifacts from the International Museum of World War II, students are practicing how to analyze primary sources, which, as we know, is an important historical thinking skill. So when you click into the resource, you come into this page, and here you see the 8 different scenarios that students can explore in this interactive. And in each scenario, there are like 4 to 6 categories of artifacts that serve as the entry point to learning about that group of young people. So we're going to click in here to French resistance. And when you get here, you see the different, actually, let me go here. Sorry, I think because I had already gone into that. Right, I want to go here. This is what you see when you first click in. And you get a few explanation pages that sort of just letting students know how the interactive works. And then once they move through those, they get that once and then ready to go. And so it doesn't matter if your students know about this topic or any of the others. Every scenario begins with some background information. Students can click on that speaker button here and have the text read to them. So they get some background, historical context, they click and they're ready to go. And here you see the 4 categories of artifacts that students can explore. And I'm sure you're already thinking about like how you could use this with groups or, assign students certain groups or let them choose. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity and flexibility with this resource. But let's click in here. And I'm going to ask you to use the chat here because this is how the students would be approaching this. So students would get in here and they'd be asked, okay, so what is this? First of all, very simple question. What is this? What are we looking at? So if you want to put that in the chat, that's a good starting point. Second question. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're good. We're very good. All right. Second question. We're talking about World War II. What does this have to do with World War II? Okay, we got some good ideas here. Excellent. Very good. And then the next question, of course, would be, what does this have to do with the French resistance? So this is a great way to get students engaged and get their minds working. Yeah, you're very good. Very good answers coming across here. All right, so now we're gonna explore. So on the second page of every image, artifact image, you have this ability to zoom in and really get up close with the artifact image. Okay, oops, sorry. And so you guys are right. This was a baby. This is a baby carriage. And then in the next slide, you see what this artifact is, and these hotspots give you a little bit more information. And here again, these could be read to students if that is something that would be helpful for them. But we can keep going. And now we get another image of this artifact. And this is sort of like the big reveal. So here, this is really going to help students understand what this has to do with World War II. So now we see there's a false bottom here in this baby carriage, and we see some kind of electronic radio here. And even if they don't know it's a radio, that's okay, because this page, again, with these hotspots, it will tell them exactly what they're looking at. And this one is really important. These radios were illegal. This is how the resistance communicated. The Germans knew that the resistance had these radios. They actually had a tool for trying to locate resistance radios. And so the radios constantly had to be on the move so that they wouldn't be found out by the Gestapo. And using these baby carriages with the false bottoms was one of the ways that they did that. So I'm going to stop there. So as students are moving through that, it's almost as close as we can get them to a museum experience and sort of discovering these artifacts. And then we've also created an independent student activity on the site that you can use with your students. And all the questions are designed to help answer this essential question: how did ordinary civilians, together with the contributions of different organizations and communities, shape the outcome of World War II? And then we have a series of questions on the French resistance. And then I think it's really important at the very end to have some discussion and bring this sort of to a human level, a personal level, because you really want students to think about, like, what risks did this young woman take as she pushed this baby carriage with her baby in it through the streets of occupied Paris? And in fact, they'll learn as they click through this interactive that women could be shot on the spot. They could be imprisoned, have the baby removed. They were taking the greatest risk here. And then to discuss why she would have taken such a risk and what was happening in occupied Paris at that time. So that's a look at that interactive. I really encourage you to take some time and explore it on your own. The second group that I wanted to highlight here, we have several resources on women in World War II. And again, I think there are several misconceptions about women's roles during World War II. One is that women only worked in factories, and that's symbolized by that iconic Rosie the Riveter image. And While millions of women certainly did work in defense industries, their roles extended far beyond manufacturing. They were pilots, they were nurses, intelligence officers, code breakers, saboteurs, pretty much any job that a man had done that was considered essential had to be taken over by women. And that, extended to things like, trash collection or window washing and those sorts of things. A second, I think, misconception about women's roles is that women's participation was temporary. And this kind of presumes that women left the home to enter the wartime workforce, which is true for about 6 million women, but 14 million women were already in the American workforce at that point in time, particularly women of color, single women, and single mothers. And then the third misconception is that women were passive or sort of non-combatants and just stayed at the home front. And so you may know that Soviet women actually served in combat and they excelled as snipers. In other nations, women participated directly in guerrilla warfare, obviously resistance movements, and military support operations. And they took on a variety of critical and often really perilous roles in the war effort. So I really like this resource on women in combat, and all of the resources here sort of develop these ideas that I've just shared with you. And this 7-minute video focuses on women from the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States. And I thought I would just play a little bit for you on women in the United States.
Men, carefully selected for character and...
In the United States, you had women serving in several auxiliary units. The WASP was a civilian organization of trained pilots.
No time to waste. Everywhere they're badly needed for ferrying duty, so that the men, trained and training, can go off to fight, while WASPs help get their ships started on the road overseas. There is a reason for the WASPs.
About 1,000 American women served in the WASPs. They were responsible for ferrying aircrafts to different air bases, testing aircrafts, training pilots.
So long, ladies. Go to it. Someday you'll be able to sit down in the evening with your husbands, who will probably be flyers, and remind them that during the war, you did your part. Keep them flying, Fibonella.
Catherine Sis Bernheim was a member of the WASP. She was already a trained pilot by the time World War II came about. She was among 28 women who were responsible for ferrying aircraft to air bases all over the country. Technically, the WASPs were non-combat, but it's interesting that WASPs referred to themselves as Avenger Girls, which points to their idea of themselves in the fight.
Okay, I'm going to stop that there. But there's a lot more to learn about women in all these different areas during the war. All right, just a few more things I wanted to share with you from this collection. Because we had at our disposal so many different artifact images, we went ahead and created different artifact galleries focused on different themes and topics. And these are really great for practicing primary source analysis with your students, as well as, showing them, I think, things that you typically really don't see in textbooks. So again, if you wanted to focus on the United States, you could go here and look at these different posters or games or other sort of everyday items that really reflected sort of the prevalence of the war and how it impacted people's everyday lives. All of these images, I should just say, you can expand. And again, we have really nice high resolution images for you to use. And as with all of the artifact galleries come with a student guide, so to help guide them through their observations. All right, and then lastly, I want to just speak to this one resource we have on propaganda in World War II, and this is an interactive lesson. And if you've not been on the site and used an interactive lesson before, these are student-facing, student-paced, sequential lessons that sort of walk students through page by page, and all geared to help them answer an essential question. And on these pages, we can have text, we can have glossary terms, we can have video, and students can actually do their work directly in the lesson and save it there. And this particular lesson, you can see all the different topics here. And really what we're trying to show here is all the different ways that propaganda was used in World War II. And then we take a deep dive into propaganda in these three countries. And then at the very end, students, as they've gathered evidence about wartime propaganda, at the end of the lesson, they can recall all of their work to answer the essential question, which is, to what extent do the benefits of propaganda outweigh the risks, or vice versa? So it's a really packed interactive lesson. There's a lot to use there, and again, I encourage you to take a look. So again, thanks for your time, and I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Mel now. I think we're going to move on to the Cold War.
Great. Thank you, Sue. I'll be talking about the Cold War, but I'll be speaking in particular about nuclear weapons and related nuclear weapon security policy. And if we could go to the next slide, please. We have launched a new collection that covers nuclear weapon and security policy, past and present, as you can see. It's 13 resources. It covers multiple perspectives, a wide variety of topics. We'll cover a few of them in more detail tonight, but I encourage you to go to this page, the collection page, where you can see all of them, and they are listed also on the document that Sue described earlier. Next page, please, Sue. You, of course, all teach Cold War topics related to nuclear weapons. You teach the Cuban Missile Crisis, I'm sure, test some of the treaties, proliferation possibly, and traditional topics related to these weapons. We also we have those in PBS Learning Media, but we're bringing in some new topics and perspectives and really trying to connect things to the current day in this collection. So, for example, I've got two new approaches featured here. One is the Moscow to Washington hotline, which is a 2-minute video describing the communication during the Cuban Missile Crisis between Moscow and Washington, and the sort of the origin story of that red phone. We take it further, though. And you can see the essential question written under those two images. But we take it further, and we have a just under 2-page reading for the students to go along with this, and mention some other near misses and accidents. So on that opening activity, Stanislav Petrov, who's pictured here, was one of the photographs. I don't know if anybody got him, but he's also known as the man who saved the world, and there's a film by that name about him. And he was a Soviet military official who bravely decided to not tell his superiors when he saw what looked like incoming nuclear missiles from the United States, a small number, on a new missile detection system, and instead said, I don't want to escalate this. He waited for the more reliable tried and true radar and used precious minutes to wait for that, where he saw that he was correct and they were not incoming missiles. So it's an individual who was brave and changed potentially the course of history. A second example of sort of covering these traditional topics, but in a new way. To the right, the 1964 ice cream ad, which was one of the campaign ads for President Johnson in 1964. And it's just a 60-second video. It's the actual ad that we feature. The students watch that. And this resource also has a reading. And in that reading, it explains what the narrator is saying, and essentially going from testing to chemical spreading to people being upset about chemical spreading. Activists and dentists got together, and they realized that by collecting baby teeth, you could check the levels of how these chemicals were spreading globally, along with women who went to Congress and protested. And by doing all this, the Partial Test Ban Treaty this was part of the process by which the Partial Test Ban Treaty was passed. So this is two examples of resources where they're highly engaging, and students can hear unfamiliar stories and hear about how individuals really made change, even with a huge issue like nuclear weapons. Next slide, please, Sue. The next resource I want to feature is called Music and Film in the Nuclear Age. And this is a media gallery, meaning that there are multiple short videos. The first video is just a brief introduction, just about a minute, describing the concept that music and film and artistic creations often reflect what people are thinking about or anxieties of the time. So this takes a total of 6 creations, creative works, either film or music, from the Cold War. and the late 1940s and early 50s. We have two pieces that are analyzed, early 60s, and then the final video is two popular 1983 movies. In these videos, we have experts, university experts, who come in and use clips from the movies or songs and explain what they tell us about the anxieties of the time. And I'd like to start by showing you from the 1983 video. This video does contain information on the day after, which the whole nation watched together. Students are unfamiliar with that concept. It wasn't streaming. It was everybody sat down on the same night and watched it. So we have one piece on that, but we're going to show you a little clip from War Games. So if you could show that, that'd be great.
The early 1980s, specifically 1983, was another one of these periods where there were immense public fears in the United States, Europe, and the Soviet Union about nuclear war breaking out. War Games is a movie from 1983, which is essentially about a young computer whiz hacker kid who is able to get into the computer of a military facility and is interacting with it, and it's basically what we would think of as an artificial intelligence. And the kid believes that he is playing a game with the computer, but the computer is actually in control of the United States nuclear weapons and inadvertently almost triggers a nuclear war.
He found the right code word to play the game.
We're in.
But it was the wrong computer.
Shall we play a game?
How can I ask you that?
How about global thermonuclear war? Fine. All right.
So I love seeing some of the quotes from the actual movies in the chat. You're familiar with these. It's great to have these professors walk us through, though, and put them in historical context for us. Professor Wellerstein, in that after that clip, goes on to talk about how the war games really made people think about nuclear war in sort of a different way, which was accidental nuclear war. So instead of thinking the Soviets will deliberately attack us, how are ways we might accidentally find ourselves in a nuclear war? Going back in time to the third video there, Protest in Politics, again, that's the Daisy ad. And then Bob Dylan is singing a song called Let Me Die in My Footsteps. And that is a protest song. So New York City had nuclear drills in case of attack where people would have to go underground when the alarm sounded. And Bob Dylan wrote and sang a protest song because he did not want to go underground. And the earliest video covers late 40s and early 50s. And it includes Duck and Cover, which I'm sure many of you use. Duck and Cover contrasts really well with Bob Dylan. And I should mention for this resource with all four videos, if you don't feel like you have time for them to watch all three of the content videos, I'd recommend having everybody watch the introduction, and then you can very easily turn this into a jigsaw with the other three videos. The other thing covered besides Duck and Shelter in the earliest one is a folk song sung by many artists. We feature the Pete Seeger version, and it's called Old Man Adam. And Old Man Adam really talks about the idea that right after World War II, even the scientists who developed the bombs became, in many cases, proponents of disarmament, and also about the brand new UN and how they considered nuclear weapons early on. So this is Professor Zia Mine from Princeton, and we'll show you a clip from Old Man Adam.
To what was happening in the world at that particular time in 1946, 1947, and 48, 49. And that was because soon after the bombing of Hiroshima, Albert Einstein and other scientists created the first scientists' organization against nuclear weapons. And they worked with trade unions, women's groups, church groups, to try and educate everybody about the dangers of nuclear weapons. At the same time, as the song also mentions, the United Nations was created, and the very first resolution ever passed by the United Nations was for a plan to abolish nuclear weapons.
You know, Einstein said he was scared. If he's scared, boy, I'm scared.
So Old Man Adam spoke both to the fears of the scientists and the fact that the United Nations also said that the biggest concern for the world was the danger of nuclear weapons.
Great. So that is the music and film resource. And now here's an interactive lesson. Sue just described to you how interactive lessons work, very student directed and a sequence of pages. And before we go into the menu here, I just want to focus on the title for a moment. Beyond Warfare, the risks and consequences of nuclear weapons, just stating the obvious that an all-out global nuclear war would be the worst consequence of these weapons. But there's sometimes some complacency because nuclear weapons haven't been used in warfare in 80 years. And sometimes students even think they're not that big a risk because they haven't been used in warfare. And the experts who we consulted with to build this collection were really said we should be really intentional about making them understand that there are plenty of other risks and consequences and costs to these weapons. Sue, if you can show the menu. We like to think of this as a resource that has something for everyone. If a student's really interested in the human costs of nuclear weapons, or some technology and the near misses, or the environment and the possibility of a nuclear war causing climate change, the financial costs, the economics of these weapons, it's all in here. Before students dive into those, if you look at the second page, why do nations develop and test nuclear weapons? That's going to be their obvious question. Why would we even build these things if they have all these risks? And we explain deterrence and prestige as the main motivators on that page before they jump into everything else. On page 4, there's a video called Atomic Veterans. So in the collection, we have a lot of information, and we have a resource entirely devoted to the Marshall Islands, a different resource, which covers what happened with the indigenous people in the Marshall Islands when the U.S. did 67 nuclear tests after World War II in their country. This video focuses on U.S. veterans who were near that testing and also near the testing in the American West, specifically in Nevada. So the beginning of this video shows what happened to atomic veterans in the Marshall Islands, and now we're going to jump into a clip from Nevada.
Not to put you into something like that.
As the Cold War heated up, atomic testing expanded to American soil, allowing the military to assess new weapons quickly and develop strategies against possible nuclear war. In Nevada, military personnel were stationed closer to the blasts than ever before.
5 military observers stood directly beneath the bursts, indicating the safety of interceptor nuclear rocketry to personnel on the ground below.
It is tremendous, directly above our heads. It went.
A range of things were assessed to see how they would stand up to nuclear explosions. A key concern for the military was how well troops could continue to function.
To avoid trouble, get down fast. If you stay down so that the flying debris can sail over you, you can protect yourself completely from atomic blasts.
My husband was in one of the front trenches, which I believe was about a mile maybe from the blast. They were told not to look at the blast. And when the explosion went off, Howdy said that the shock waves had made part of the trenches crumble around them.
Since the biggest value of the operation is for us to prove to ourselves that it can be done, psychiatrists are with us to study our reactions before, during, and after the experience.
And then they were loaded up and taken to have lunch.
But we have had proven to us that a soldier can fight and survive on an atomic battlefield if he protects himself adequately.
Yeah, I can see the comments in the chat, and yeah, the image of the using a broom to sweep off the radiation is pretty jarring for sure. Other topics covered in this interactive lesson, as I mentioned, include the environment and nuclear winter. There's a video from MIT that's really great if students are interested in nuclear winter. And then I just wanted to look at the page 9. This is a page devoted to the financial costs of nuclear weapons. And we have brief descriptions that feature 3 different countries: Pakistan, North Korea, and the United States. And in the case of the first two, Pakistan and North Korea, these are nations with very high rates of poverty. nations where their citizens did not get basic services like electricity, and there was famine and food shortages, yet they have spent billions of dollars building nuclear weapons. So the opportunity cost for the people living in those two countries is obvious. The third country is the very wealthy United States. And students will, on this page, consider what are the opportunity costs of the United States building and funding all these nuclear weapons. The green line represents US spending. All of the other 8 nuclear armed states are below. So that's a pretty powerful graphic. And the United States is increasing its nuclear spending considerably. That is in the budget. Next page, please, Sue. Here are 3 other resources from the collection that relate very closely to the Cold War. So just wanted to show you those. Those are on the sheet that Sue mentioned earlier that you'll be receiving after the webinar. And then finally, if you're thinking, should I teach the Cold War and nuclear weapons? These are 2024 and 2025 headlines. One is actually from this week, and I'm just struck by the fact that not all, but many of these could come from the Cold War, or with slight tweaking, they could seem like they came right from the Cold War. So we do seem to be in a new nuclear age. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Denise.
I just wanted to talk briefly about a special opportunity for classrooms working with this collection that we've added to this project, and that is a youth media challenge. So this media project invites students to share what they've learned about nuclear weapons and security policy in a video format. This is their chance to process what they've seen, share their perspectives, learn from other students, and they can get really creative with the video format, but we've also given them some essential questions to use as prompts. Next slide, please. For the challenge, excuse me, students can work solo or in groups, and submissions are accepted on a rolling, ongoing basis. And to give students space to publish their work nationally, we partnered with station KQED in California to use their youth media challenge platform. Student entries will be posted on this site, and this is not a contest, it's a celebration of student work. And this platform gives them space to share. So far we have almost 20 classrooms who are participating, with more joining every day. And you can find instructions for implementing the challenge on the website, and we'll put the link in the chat and in that document. Next slide, please. I'm going to play a small sample, Sue's going to play a small sample of one of the videos that we've already received that you can see on the platform. While she's queuing that up, I also
imagine a bomb that can obliterate an entire city in seconds. It can kill thousands of people and leave the land unsafe for many years. This is what nuclear weapons do. They are the most dangerous weapons ever made. But why are these weapons still such a big danger today, even after so many years? And how do nuclear weapons affect us now, and why do they remain a threat for the future?
So that's just one sample of student work, and if you'd like to watch it in full, you can find it on that KQED platform. And I also wanted to add that we have a paid opportunity with this Youth Media Challenge if you participate in our research project. So 2 ways to participate, and all the information will be in our follow-up materials. So I'm going to flip it back to Alicia.
Thank you so much.
Imagine a bomb.
All right, now we're gonna talk about I know what I oftentimes see in my curriculum. I teach here in Washington, D.C. for public schools, and oftentimes not just in D.C. but in other places and other curriculums, we as teachers, our curriculum kind of calls for, when we talk about post-World War II foreign policy and the civil rights movement, they're kind of taught on 2 separate tracks in our classrooms. We either focus first on the Cold War, right, and then the civil rights movement later, and we really don't leave as much as I would like, discussion on how they influenced each other. When in fact, Russians have used America's history of racism and discrimination to discredit America's position as a world leader and defender of democracy since the Bolshevik Revolution. The government was intent on trying to find ways to avoid the discussion of segregation in this country, like on a global scale. So let's take this 1969 Soviet propaganda poster, and I'll give you a couple seconds to analyze it. Some of the questions, if you were to pose this to your students, I know I have, I'll ask them, what do you see? What do you think is going on here? What point do you think the author is trying to make? Well, what do you wonder about, civil rights immediately after World War II and how it relates to the Cold War? What are some predictions that you can make? Next slide. Our resource, Civil Rights at Home and Abroad During the Cold War, really helps to provide students with much needed historical context. Let's watch a clip.
Interesting aspects of the civil rights controversies of the late 50s was they were televised.
Little Rock, Arkansas. The white population are determined to prevent colored students from going to the school their own children attend.
This was one of the first times in U.S. history when racial violence could be seen all over the world.
You've got 9 black honor students just trying to go to school, just trying to get an education. We see white mobs, angry mobs, trying to get at the kids.
The Times of India tracked it day by day. Race was undermining the ability of the United States to appeal to emerging new nations, and it raised questions. Why should we be your ally when you treat people who look like me this way?
I find this, I love using this resource in my class. The video footage is just so powerful to me. And let's be honest, any video footage with Carol Anderson, one of my favorite historians, helping to provide historical insight, it's going to be good and powerful, right? So this resource is accompanied by an independent activity, which you can see on the next page. That gives students the same opportunity that I kind of gave you at the beginning of this exercise to analyze and to make conclusions after analyzing Soviet propaganda. Well, after students take a look at these posters and, same questions that I kind of posed to you, what do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Right. Then you go ahead and you show them the clip in its entirety that I just showed you. And then we provide a space for the students as they're watching the clip to take notes. And then when they're done, the goal of it is that students are then asked to use the information that they were able to extract from analyzing the 2 Soviet posters that you see on the screen, along with the information they were able to collect from the video, and create a short written response to an essential question that we provided. And the essential question that we provided is, how did the Cold War and U.S. domestic race relations influence the United States government's response to the civil rights struggle? So once again, we're giving our students an opportunity not to study and analyze these 2 historical events separately, but to see how do they interplay with each other and how are they influencing each other. Next slide. Now, in 1953, Eisenhower created a single United States Information Agency, the USIA, as one kind of like a stop shop for the engagement of global public opinion. In 1955, Congressman Adam Clayton Powell Jr., he even convinced U.S. leaders that jazz was the best way to intervene in the Cold War cultural conflict and actually, could help counter Soviet stories about American racism. And so what they ended up doing was they ended up charging people like Dizzy Gillespie, Louis Armstrong, Dave Brubeck, to take on the role of jazz ambassadors and represent America and go all throughout the world. Europe, they went to Africa, they went to the Soviet Union. There were cases of them going to Turkey, to Greece. Next slide. This particular resource has a series of videos in it. It's called a media collection. And I know as teachers, we oftentimes are dissuaded from showing entire documentaries or anything that's, too long, longer than 30 minutes. And so the great thing about our clips is that you'll never really find a clip longer than 7 minutes in our collection. I find that that's kind of like that sweet spot for students to make sure they're still engaged. And also kind of helps if an administrator comes in, they're not saying, why do you have a movie showing on a Friday? Because it's only 6 to 7 minutes. But in addition to that, we also have a background reading that goes along with it. And in the background reading, it really is geared to help students of all different levels. We have in-text definitions, as you can see on the screen. We got pictures. We also have chunks. Next slide. And as a teacher, I actually use these resources in class. And even when I'm out with a substitute, I definitely make sure I use many of our resources because they really are structured in a way that the students can be pretty much on autopilot, as you can see, like from just this screenshot. From this particular resource, Jazz Diplomacy During the Cold War, we provide students with something to do from the very beginning to the very end, right? They're engaged. We have warm-up questions, we have while viewing questions, and then we have synthesis questions after viewing. And then one of my favorites, we also have something called Taking It Further. And the Taking It Further questions are just really effective topics and ideas and questions that we pose to you all that you actually can use them as topics for future debates if you want to continue having the students learn about this. They also serve as project activities that students can do, research papers as well. I had one of my coworkers use one of our resources, and she literally took all 4 of the Taking It Further questions that we had, and she was able to structure projects around the ideas that we gave her. One per week. So she was able to stretch it out for 3 whole weeks on the topic. And so in addition to that, the questions for while viewing, they're all scaffolded. And what I like about it is that they're all of varying levels of rigor. So they're not just purely knowledge questions that you see on Bloom's taxonomy or Marzano's different level of questioning. We have analysis, we have application, and we also have synthesis. And I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Denise.
Yes. So wrapping up, I just wanted to point out some other social studies resources that we have on Learning Media. First and foremost is our U.S. History Collection, award-winning, now with over 2 million users. You've seen some resources from that tonight. American Experience and Frontline, of course, and our new Civics Collection that we launched in the fall that's doing very well. And then also not produced by GBH, but of interest to many, I'm sure, is the Ken Burns in the Classroom collection. And we're looking forward to American Revolution in November. And finally, Frontline Short Docs is excerpts of longer Frontline documentaries. These are about 20-minute chunks, very digestible for students as well. Next and final slide. Help us do better. Thank you for coming tonight. You can go follow this link, and if someone could put that in the chat, please, that would be helpful. Follow this link and fill out the survey, and that helps us. The survey will close on the 24th. And if you do that, you'll also be able to download a certificate of attendance that you can bring to your administration for credit, depending on their policies. So thank you again. You will get a follow-up email with links to the recording and to the resource doc. And next slide, please. We have a little glitch, so it's going to take us a little bit longer to get that email to you, but we will soon. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please email us at education@wgbh.org. Thank you again.